I am Ankita Sharda. I am a Google Cloud Consulting account lead. I'm also part of Women at Cloud leadership team in Google Cloud. And I identify as women of color. And I'm honored to lead this discussion and moderating this amazing panel. With that, what to expect in this session? In this session, you'll hear from two amazing GCP customers, Twilio and Near Foundation, and amazing women leaders from that team to talk about how they have really partnered with Google Cloud to evolve their diversity, equity, and inclusion focus, and how they're continuously partnering with us, and what's our Better Together story. But before we get into the panel discussion, I do wanted to spend some time, which I think most of us in the group, as I see, what already agree or know is, who are people of color? Who are women of color, and why it matters? So people of color are individuals who identify with a race or ethnicity that is not considered to be white. This could include people of Asian, African, Latinx, and Native American backgrounds. Women of color are people of color that identify as women in that kind of area. Why it matters. So as you see the stats, and I'm sure a lot of us have seen the stats across different sources, different years, and across different groups, it matters because while we've read through the stats, we have made a lot of progress, it's still staggeringly underrepresentative, especially in C-level leadership. We have less than 5% in C-level leadership, although we make women of color make significant portion of that workspace. In fact, I was reading this really interesting stat by Catalyst that by 2016, although we're already getting there, every 1 in 5 women are actually progressing to be women of color. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be senior leadership. Racial and gender biases are barriers to significant advancement of this race, like significant advancement of all underrepresented groups in that matter. And the intersection of these systemic inequalities further outsize and impact this group the most. Some of us have been through it. All of our challenges are different. We embrace the differences, but we also learn from a lot of these challenges. So, like I said, we have made significant progress. We should celebrate the progress, but the statistics is not what we want. So I still see this not necessarily as just challenging story, but an opportunity. Because we each play and should play an important role to identify, elevate, and empower these next generation of women of color in leadership. So with that said, by working together, we can create an equitable workspace, give opportunities, identify new leaders, and elevate. That's why I'm excited to host this panel. I'm honored to be leading this panel as women of color, and we have these two amazing panelists also identify as women of color. These are the leaders who are working day in, day out to expand the impression of what leadership should look like, and learn and figure out how do we create these opportunities together. I do see in the group, again, a lot of us are here who relate to this in some way or the other. We definitely want people who don't relate to this also to know that, because that's where the most unconscious biases start. It's not conscious. A lot of it is not conscious, hopefully, but some are unconscious. But again, I think baby steps, maybe. Like, at least that's what this representation definitely tells me. But I'm super excited for you guys. We want this discussion to be super engaging. While we have panel, we want the audience to ask us questions, share their challenging stories, and let's learn from each of our diverse experiences. So without wasting more time on my talk, I'll just intro our amazing panelist, Ayoung. Welcome to the stage. She leads the developer engagement efforts at Near Foundation, working to push for more diversity and inclusivity in developer landscape. She actually is one of the key person to empower the underrepresented devs. And I think one of the main things I do want to say, English is not her first language, but English was one of the core subjects in school. And she pursued liberal arts degree, and yet she has only worked in tech. So welcome, Ayoung. Our second panelist is Meera. Meera Vaidyanathan is Vice President of Product Management at Twilio. She's an accomplished product leader with over 2 decades of experience, and she has an experience across a lot of diverse landscape. Meera knows 7+ languages, and English is also not her first language. So all of us actually who will be talking about our shared experience, English is not our first language. We all immigrated. I think Meera and I immigrated as first generation to move from our countries to America, and we all identify as women of color. So with that, thank you. We'll get into the panel discussion. Awesome. So, okay, perfect, these chairs. I think as the audience is also here, and you can see the group that we have today, a lot of us ask and also kind of challenge ourselves if we are the only one who is going through this, or what is even unconscious biases that people of color, as well as women of color, see in leadership roles. So I want you guys to talk through, maybe starting with Ayoung, what those unconscious biases you have seen and what those challenges you've gone through. And most important, because we do talk about challenges, everybody is again, we embrace the difference, we talk about challenges, but most importantly, what was a breakthrough moment where you figured it out, or at least figuring it still out, and people, the new generation of leaders can learn from it?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you all for coming today. Yeah, so I think my journey to where I am right now today with you lovely folks is, my exposure to biases, and especially targeted at women of color, started also fairly early with my immigrant mother. And so we immigrated to the States from Korea when I was 6 years old. And so I got firsthand experience just seeing my mother really struggling to find a role within her profession. When we first moved, we were living in a predominantly white area of the country. And so it was challenging, to say the least, for her to find a footing when she didn't speak English very well. She definitely did not look like many of the people who were in her profession as well. And over time, she did manage to climb up slowly but surely, but it still was very evident that she was never going to be able to reach the top ranks because, again, she did not sound like what they assumed a leader would sound like, neither did she look like one. And coincidentally, I actually went to a women's college, and I went to Wellesley College, which is right outside of Boston. And during my time there, during my time there, I actually really got a privileged view of what it can look like when women are in leadership roles, because at a women's college, all of the clubs on campus, all of the student organizations, all the leaders are women, and that is actually something that we rarely get to experience. And that was sort of my first real life example of, wow, women are just as capable as leaders, just as anyone else. And that was kind of when I realized, leaders truly are created and they're not born that way. And so all of these biases that impact us as we're growing up, I think we internalize a lot of it as well. And that definitely was the case for me, because I feel like I guess maybe to backtrack. So during my time at Wellesley, I actually did a liberal arts degree, as Ankita mentioned. I studied political science and economics, and when I graduated, I never would have thought I would be working in tech, but here I am, and I've never left. A lot of reason is because I do feel like there's a lot of opportunity for us to make a difference. And over the course of my time and my career, I realized that I kind of wanted to be a part of the force for change. We see a lot of the statistics, we even saw them today, and there's just a lot of underrepresented groups. And I I realized if you want to be a part of like the hiring decisions, if you want to be a part of really helping to set team culture, you have to be on that side of the fence. And so most of my career I spent very business adjacent, but then I decided to make the transition to being more technical adjacent. That transition did not go very easily. It took multiple years. And again, I think I faced both external and internal biases that kind of, I think of it as just imposter syndrome. But one, I think the fact that I was able to make this transition is progress in itself. I think that also says a lot to how far we've come. But I also do think that there's so much more that we can be doing. And yeah, I think just speaking up and having these opportunities to share is just really important.
Yeah, I love that story ultimately it stands out that resilience kind of overcome intersectionalities, but at the same time, like having that opportunity, like learning from other women as you grew up in that environment is core to like seeing that opportunities exist. You just have to create one and be at this table for sure. Mira, what about you? Like, of course, like you immigrated to the United States, you had like over 2 decades of experience, you started early on, and times might be even more different and less progressive.
Calling me old.
So, not really, more experienced and mature. So what do you think, like those biases and how to deal with this, how to enable people who are unconsciously maybe are going through that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think I was aware that there were biases. So this was, going back 20 years when I started off in tech, and it was more on the education side of tech. So here I'm working on a highly technical product, lots of data, millions of daily active users and so on. And I'm not, my background is in anthropology. I don't have a technical background, and I'm a woman. Oh my God, all the odds are now stacked against me. And I'm sitting in these rooms and I'm having this out-of-body experience where I had self-doubt myself, right? I'm sitting there thinking like, is this something that I can understand? Is this something that I can actually make a go of? Like, later came to be known as imposter syndrome. I guess I was experiencing this then. And really the breakthrough for me actually happened pretty early on, thankfully. I'm sitting in this room, it's my 2nd week on the job. We're talking about launching a new set of reports for this product. And people are talking about terabytes of data, they're talking about latency, they're talking about all of these things, words I hadn't heard before, because I had thought I wanted to be a teacher. So I suddenly found myself in this product management role and listening to all these words. And people are describing, they have mocks, they're showing all of these things on the screen. And I'm sitting there and I have all these questions, right? I have these questions about, like, from the customer perspective. I have questions about, have they considered X? Have they considered Y? And I was sort of too intimidated to ask this, which in itself was a mind-boggling moment for me because I'm an incredibly outspoken person. There's not a thought that hasn't left my head. And it's taken me years to figure out like what to keep inside and what to say. So it was really hard in those moments to have to control myself and have these moments of doubt. So I wrote down these 3 questions. And I'm watching this meeting, 13, 14 people in the room. And finally, a couple of people in the room, fairly junior folk, they were like, okay, I have this question and I have this next question. And they were all the questions that I had. And that really was my breakthrough moment, was like, it didn't matter that I didn't, understand how these databases were built. It didn't matter that I didn't understand, like, how the front-end experience came together. And none of it really mattered, because if you go to the core of, like, what is the problem you're trying to solve for whoever your, customer might be, like, that's where you really bring yourself to shine. And the aha for me was my non-technical background was actually a strength, because it was possible for me to sort of step outside of the what felt like, chains of understanding the implementation and feeling sort of beholden to building this the fastest way or the most expedient way or using the sexiest technology, whatever it is. None of that mattered to me because I didn't understand any of it. But I could bring my non-technical experience to bear in that room. And it also, the other aha was really about being vulnerable to say, well, look, I don't understand what you're saying when you say this is hard to do. Like, help me understand why this is hard to do. Help me understand the trade-off. And the thing that I've learned over the years is that, the more you poke, when something doesn't smell right, like, you gotta keep poking there because there's definitely something wrong. And this is very much the see something, say something. I think, and I say this to everybody, not just, women of color, anyone. I'm like, you have to speak up because anything you're experiencing, there's probably at least 5 others who are. And I think it's our responsibility as leaders and as builders of technology to bring that to bear.
Agreed. So definitely do not make vulnerability as your weakness and make it as a strength. Talking to the shared experiences, very similar to Ayoung and Mira, I started in management consulting. That is coming from a different country, from a different background. When you start in a profession like consulting, especially when you're hanging out, going out with a lot of customer dinners and everything, and not knowing enough about American culture, resulted into a lot of conversations where I am a very outspoken person, very outgoing, but there was a time when I was still trying to understand and navigate these conversations where I started to become a little bit shy and talk less. And because I was maybe the things that I don't know, I should not add value to. I don't know if I should be asking these questions, very similar things. So authentic self and be more authentic rather than assimilating, which I think I did strong in a first year of my career around that. But then finding people who've gone through this, learning from other shared experiences, definitely help okay, if I don't understand American sports, we don't have to talk about it. I can just ask about maybe you like beer or wine, I don't know, a different topic that more people feel inclusive. So instead of trying to fit in, which we all try to do, no matter how much our consciously or unconscious brain says that, we kind of move towards more authentic self. So I think the other thing we do talk about is DEI programs. Everybody, at least now in day and age, most companies are trying to have a DEI unique story. They're trying to figure out programs. We have resources and structure. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it works for you. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it might be valuable for you. So we have gone through a lot of DEI stories together in the programs. But we also know when two mature ecosystems come together, bring the journey, there's a better together story. Like Ayoung, you said, rising tide lift all boats. So I think would be also good for an audience to understand how as companies we partnered, and we each have a different story as to how we partnered and how we brought together. Just for the fact for this audience, I did not know Ayoung and Mira before I started working with them. And now we've built this relationship that we feel comfortable engaging in this conversation and trying to figure out a story where we can help more leaders or inspire more leaders as they take the path. So maybe Mira, actually Ayoung, how do you want to talk about how Near Foundation and Google actually partnered through the DEI story?
Yeah, absolutely. So this all started about a few months ago. It was actually during Women's History Month.
Yeah.
Our lovely Google rep who owns a Near Foundation account with Google Cloud, Colleen, she invited me to an event called an I Am Remarkable workshop. I had no idea what it was. I walked in not really having any expectations, and within 90 minutes at the close of the workshop, I walked out a changed person, and I do not say that lightly. There's a lot of, I think we have a lot of stigmas around how we talk about our accomplishments, and that's exactly what the workshop tries to change. Instead of us thinking about self-promotion as a negative thing, as bragging, how can we think about it as, if I don't tell anyone, how will they know? There's a lot of work that goes into our daily lives that people don't know or understand because they don't see it. And especially in a remote working environment, like I work in Web3 and Web3 is mostly remote. And just being able to kind of talk about your accomplishments, that's so important. And so, I walked out of the workshop thinking that was a phenomenal experience, and I really wanted to kind of share that, and Colleen made a great suggestion, to bring it to Near. And so with Ankita's support, we brought the program to the Near Foundation leadership team, mainly our amazing Chief People Officer, as well as our CEO, both of whom are women. And I just told them, I think this is a fantastic workshop. Google, will share this with their partners, and we can be one of them. And so that's kind of how this journey started, and here we are. I just really think that being able to share that resource was really helpful, because Near Foundation, we're a very small team, but we are a globally distributed ecosystem, and we have people all over the world. And I think this message is something that everyone should hear. And I know it started out as a program geared towards women, but eventually they opened it up to everyone because they realized this is something that everyone should be able to understand and really internalize. And I'm just really excited because we've hosted a couple of internal sessions, and we're hoping to take the workshop to the ecosystem. And so I'm very excited for the potentials.
Those who don't know what I'm Remarkable is, it's like a Google-led program where we do like a 90 minutes workshop, and it's open to all, so it's not just specific to gender or like a specific race or ethnicity, but really that's where one of the core things is helping understand how to promote yourself and be open about your achievements. To Ayoung's point, specifically coming from Asian culture, we are not taught. In fact, we are told to downplay a little bit of our achievements because it's more of like skewed towards humbleness, but it's more of like, okay, you shouldn't be talking about over and over what you've learned. But that can be not very good when you're having conversations with your managers, or even like you're trying to figure out what you can bring to the table. So I think that brings a little bit of change in that mindset, and that's super helpful. And especially with Web3, like Web3 as one of the newer advanced tech on the platform ecosystem, we are super excited to help you scale. I'm Remarkable. Twilio is a very different story. Like, actually, there are two parallel stories with Twilio. We did start an I'm Remarkable program with Twilio with 26 I'm Remarkable workshops, 172 Twilians. But I think just talking about Mira, maybe like how your specific product group and like how what does the partnership with Google is around diversity, DEI, actually exclusively, and like giving the stage to women of color.
Yeah, absolutely. Our relationship didn't start at all from that workshop. It was very much business driven, and we were trying to do some work around, big surprise, AI, and lots of meetings, with Googlers as well as Twilions in these meetings. And I think it was very much from the get-go that Ankita and I really hit it off, because we started to notice in the very first meeting how much we had from a shared value perspective. Like Google and Twilio, definitely their shared values, but at a personal level, we found that there was an immediate meeting of minds. We were addressing the topics, encouraging folks in the audience to sort of speak up, bring their diverse perspectives, the quieter voices, people of all colors, everything. All the perspectives were valid, they were important. This is an area where I think all of us knew enough to be dangerous, but there was so much of the iceberg that still had to be explored. But it was truly a symbiotic partnership where we were both sort of aspiring to get all the voices heard, and it's been a great partnership, I have to say.
Yep. I think to the similar conversation, I think, and the point is like, you don't have to adopt DEI, just how it is set up. Definitely, like there has been a lot of advancements and progresses to the structure and framework, considering multiple perspectives and diverse perspectives. But it definitely starts with, like, for example, I was in these conversations, Meera and I were in the conversations where we were driving a lot of technical conversations, and I remember a meeting where we had engineering folks on the Google side and engineering and product folks on the Twilio side, and I don't remember exactly who, but somebody like skipped directly to Meera's direct report, thinking that's the person who's actually driving the decisioning and technical, because I don't know whether it was an unconscious bias or an assumption that was made. And I remember Meera like coming back with that same perspective and what she talked about before, vulnerability is not the weakness, of like kind of taking control of the conversation, but driving it in a very productive way so everyone in that room feels included. It doesn't have to be just one opinion. And it was kind of reverse mentoring for me, or like trying to understand the challenges. So again, DEI can be applied. It doesn't have to be a concept or a checkbox or training. It can be in your everyday with people you work, people you share your experiences with. And as the community that we represent here today, women of color, it's kind of our part also to enable people who are unconsciously not aware about certain cues. Again, to give an example, when I started my career, and specifically in America, I used to get this a lot because I was a little bit kind of quieter when I started speaking. So earlier I used to be, maybe it's totally unintentional. They're just trying to figure it out and like clearly hear. But then I decided to like really not call them out, but kind of like help them understand, or like try myself as well to be a little bit louder if it's more clear for everyone. Again, that's just different cues and like how you can figure out through when you work through challenges and experiences. We have 17 minutes left, so I'll just cover one more question. And we definitely want, because this audience is definitely, I think, who relate with all what we're talking through, so we want you guys to ask questions or even like share your stories. So one last question, both for you, Ayoung and Meera, is we are talking to women of colors in tech space, right? Of course, like there's a lot bigger industry. So how do you leverage your position or role or the authority or even like your current impact in your organization to support people of color or to drive that DEI focus to consider more diverse perspective?
Again, I go back, this goes back probably a decade. I was at a company where every meeting started with, reading a document, and I never thought anything of it. Like I studied English from when I was growing up, kindergarten, I think. Never thought I had been doing it for many months before that, and so there was this document, we're all reading it, and I start to get these messages on my computer from this colleague, a woman, an immigrant. She had just moved to the country. She's like, this document's dense, there's really a lot of information here. Everyone's finished reading it and I haven't. And she's like, I can't contribute to this conversation. And I had been, as I mentioned, in this practice and never questioned it until that moment when she raised this question. This is sort of, I guess, less of a woman of color story and more of a, neurodiversity challenge, right? So it opened my eyes as well to the fact that, you might have people with reading challenges as well in the room, and we weren't taking any of those things into consideration by saying this is the way this business operates. We've all noticed this, right? Like we've seen almost every implement is built for right-handed people. You just assume that that's how the world operates. So when I think about how do you bring this perspective into the work that we do, the tools we build, I think it is important to be intentional to know and to help your teams understand that the products that we build aren't just being used by people who look like us, they're being used by people who, come in all shapes, sizes, colors, like, different ways of thinking, different perspectives. And so you can't build the perfect thing that works absolutely for everybody, but how do you consider more and more of these perspectives to think about user experience in a more inclusive way. It was also a thing that really opened my eyes to the importance of design in technology and design having a seat at the table. Like, I'm sure all of you work in some form of like a technical field, either directly or indirectly. Like, show of hands, like how often is design, have a seat at the table when you're designing or thinking about a product?
I think one person did. No, I think I saw.
Okay, one. Yeah. So it is. I think that. So that's how I think about it, and that's how, in my role, like I make sure that we are considering these things. Like I work on a product for contact centers, so everyone has had a support experience. Probably not the greatest one, but when you flip and you think about the person on the other end who's taking your call, like they're presented with an insane amount of information, right? Like if it's a fintech company, whatever, they're looking at like who you called, why you called, all your investments from before, and all of these are disconnected systems. And this poor human has to stitch all this information together while you're probably, tapping your pen on the table, waiting for them to give you the answer that you called for. How do we build products to make sure that these support people are given only the information they absolutely need to answer your question, right? So then you leave happy quickly, and they are also engaged in their roles, so they're not put through this sort of personal pain. So it's like small examples like this, but I think all of these things go a long way in terms of thinking about the diversity of perspective and thought.
Yep.
Yeah, so honestly, I think what Mira said just now is spot on. So in my role, I get to advocate for developers within our ecosystem. And again, one of the reasons why I made this transition was because I wanted to bring in more diverse perspectives. And one of the best parts, and also I think the hardest parts about being in Web3 is that it really is a global ecosystem, and in a way it's borderless. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring in more diverse perspectives and to encourage builders from non-traditional backgrounds to become involved, because with more diverse, I guess, understanding of what the needs are out there and what the actual use cases can be, we just create a better ecosystem. And I guess one example that like pops into my head that I really feel like can be solved with Web3 is this idea of financial stability and independence. I have the privilege, and I think most people in Western societies have the privilege of being able to access fairly dependable financial institutions, and also the ability to manage my own finances. Not everyone has that ability. I think the statistic I've heard is there's about 1 billion unbanked people around the world, many of whom are women, and that just means that they don't have a way to keep their money safe if they're even allowed to actually have access to their own finances. And obviously, barring any cultural restrictions, I don't see how giving those people the ability to maintain their finances could be a bad thing. And kind of, I guess, like to round it out to one of the things that we touched on earlier, I really do believe in a rising tide lifts all boats. And so if we're able to help people around the world achieve financial stability or whatever else it may be, maybe feeling more empowered to talk about their accomplishments, I think that's the way to move forward. And yeah, I think there's a lot we can do.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, especially I remember you telling the story, the reason you took this role in developer advocacy is trying to give more opportunities to underrepresented developers, whether it's leveraging the ecosystem or opening that up. So to your point, I think you mentioned that almost 1 billion, and most of them are women, who do not have financial independence globally. So having that in DEI, of course, is a second priority to them because they're still trying to figure it out. So having that opportunities is first before even thinking about that is important. I think fun last question, and then I'll move on to audience. What would you say has been, or I think what would be one key piece of advice that you would offer this group, which includes women of color, mostly that I'm seeing, but also our sponsors or like our network and people who are our allies who do help us and kind of help us create the path as we succeed. One advice, each of you.
Sure. I think there's no substitute really for building expertise in whatever field you're working in, right? But I think at the same time, while you're working on gaining that expertise, whatever it might be, whether you're shifting roles, changing verticals, whatever it is, I think there's always a little voice inside our heads that your gut is telling you something, and it's telling you something doesn't smell right. Trust it. Speak up. Ask questions. Like, do not be afraid to, don't worry that it might seem like a stupid question or too basic. It's always a valid question. Like that is something that I live by, and I absolutely believe that that's true.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Honestly, again, building off of what Mira just said, I think being able to speak up and not being afraid to speak up. I guess from Mira's perspective, it's about, if something seems off, or, if there's some way you can contribute to something to make it better, don't be afraid to speak up. And I think, kind of going back to what I was talking about before, don't be afraid to speak out or speak up about what you believe in, what you've done to get to where you are, and what you hope to accomplish, and just sending that out into the world, I think, can create a lot of opportunities. And I mean, I'm a prime example. I wouldn't have gotten to this point if I didn't tell people that I wanted to make this transition. And I've had so many amazing mentors and friends who've helped me to get to this point. And again, if I hadn't said anything, they wouldn't have known. So don't be afraid to talk.
I know we are over time. Thank you all who made the time. If there are no other questions, we can let you go. And again, thank you again.
Thank you.